Okay, today I want to bring you The Will to Power by Friedrich Nietzsche. And this book has a split in whether people like it, whether people don't. I think a lot of people misinterpret it, and I'll give a little historical context of why this book is so misinterpreted. But I think it's important to understand that if you're looking for the greatest work of Nietzsche, I don't think it's here. I think it certainly has interesting points, but I think the overall contents of the book is damaged because it was Nietzsche's journals. It really wasn't something he meant to publish. And while there's some great ideas locked behind some of the aphorisms in this book, I think because it was the startings of great ideas, because it was the fleshing out of certain things and not meant to be published, it's not as polished, it's not as precise, it's not as poetic as something that you would read from the Gay Science, which I think is Nietzsche's greatest work that I've read. There's an argument that thus spoke Zarathustra is better, but it just depends if you like allegory versus if you like philosophy. But overall, I think this is an interesting book. I think there's parts of it that aren't too fun to read, that aren't too exciting, but then you'll turn the page and you find a very, very interesting idea. Some of the ideas that stuck out to me were how Nietzsche basically said that the eternal recurrence is the greatest triumph of life. If you can live your life as if you're destined to repeat it time and time again, if you can live your life as if the moment that you're in right now is something that will repeat and echo into eternity, then you can live the greatest life possible. And if you continually reflect on this idea, then you will be as happy as you can be, and you will be not limited by the things that limit most people. And this is really at the end of the book, and I wish it was much earlier because I feel like it would have changed the way I viewed it. But again, this is a book that is largely all over the place, largely scattered, and trying to collect similar themes from his journals and trying to put them into one cohesive structure, which in some parts it works, in some parts it doesn't. Another idea I found super, super interesting was the idea that all morality is contradictory. All morality is hypocritical. And this is the idea that for there to be peace, there must have been some conflict before. Because there's no such thing as a nation that does not rise out of conflict. Whether it's political strife, whether it's actual warfare, whether it's some sort of passive-aggressive seizure of power. Like, there's always some sort of juxtaposition to our senses of morality as well as, what we are calling taboo. And perhaps the greatest definition or the greatest example of this idea is think about why do we all follow laws? And to a certain degree, you can say that, we're good people, we're honest people, we do this, we do that. But there's also some element that beyond just our sensibilities, there's the threat of violence. Beyond our sensibilities, there's the cops, there's the military, there's the people that keep us from committing crimes. And that's really what he's talking about here. And I think this is a very interesting idea, especially in the context of today, because much of the discourse is very disingenuous. Much of the discourse is, oh, well, I'm the greatest person ever, so you should listen to me and you should give me all the power because once I get it, I'm going to be great. And, Nietzsche says a bunch of interesting things about power in this book. Obviously, the book is mostly about power. And he basically says something similar to what Abraham Lincoln said. I might butcher the quote, but Lincoln said, every man can endure struggle, every man can endure hardship, but to test the real power of a man is to give him power and see what he does with it. And this means that when someone is given the opportunity to exact their will, do they act with kindness? Do they act with fairness? Do they act with generosity? Or do they act like a dictator? Do they act like someone that should never have power in the first place? And this is much of what Nietzsche says. Nietzsche says that most of our niceties, most of our pleasantries come from our fear, come from our inability to get exactly what I want. And it's very, very interesting when you start to play with these ideas, and I think it hits at a much deeper element of human nature. But again, it's the scatteredness of this work that kind of diminishes it. Another idea I found super, super compelling was Nietzsche said that anyone that understands fame does not want it. Anyone that understands where fame comes from is the furthest thing from what they desire. Because what Nietzsche is saying here is that all fame, all recognition, all accolades are from envy. And inherently, what people are doing is they're trying to live through us. They're envying our accomplishment, and they're really trying to, by any means, live out what you're living. by any means capture an essence of what you're experiencing. And it is something that when you start to realize, when you start to look at people that blindly follow celebrities, like, it's just jealousy. That's really all it is. It's like a repressed jealousy that you put out in the form of adoration, and it's really sad to see the state of affairs that we live in, the state of the world that we live in. Because think it's never been more socially acceptable to worship idols. It's never been more socially acceptable to venerate people in such a light. And the last thing I want to talk about before I end the video is, overall, I think this is a book that you should read if you're interested in Nietzsche. I think this is a book that you will find great interest in certain parts. You'll be bored in other parts. Some of the ideas are jumbled. It's not as quite precise as other works of Nietzsche, such as Beyond Good and Evil or The Gay Science. I think those are much better reads. But The Will to Power is interesting for that. It wasn't meant to be published, and sometimes we get the most raw sides of our favorite authors through the works that weren't meant to be published. Think of Meditations, think of Kafka's Diaries, think of works like this. Anything that wasn't meant to be published has a certain, lack of performity, which is sometimes appreciated, especially through minds like Nietzsche. But the overall idea of the book is also bastardized in a certain sense, that Nietzsche's sister is the one that published this book, and she was basically married to a avowed anti-Semite. So basically what happened was this book got into the wrong hands during the 1940s and was used as a justification for certain ideologies, which is so ironic, because if you read Aphorism 716, it's basically saying that anything that is done by a group is really just the weakness of its members. Any movement, anything that's pushed out from a collective is really just the darkness that is in every individual being pushed out. And basically, it's ironic that the fascists were in love with Nietzsche's ideas, because Nietzsche is opposed to any sort of authoritarian systems, any sort of set rigidities, any sort of set belief systems that limit the individual and stop people from becoming all they can be. So, I really want you to read Nietzsche with this context. I really want you to read Nietzsche with the understanding that he's a fierce individualist. Like, if you need to understand that Nietzsche is an individualist, understand that Ayn Rand loved this book. Ayn Rand loved Nietzsche because she basically saw her own philosophy or her own fierce, radical, individualist ideals in Nietzsche. So take it with that context. Take everything you read about the book with a grain of salt, because, again, it's like everything. People like to take works of great minds and pollute it and create their own narratives around it. The same thing happened with Jung. Obviously, it happened with Nietzsche. It's happened with so many writers. You see it today with Orwell. A lot of people that are partisan actors are taking up the writings of Orwell and saying it's literally 1984. And, I just think that we should have a more unbiased lens when it comes to reading these authors and understand what they were actually about, not what people used their writings to justify. I mean, the greatest example of this is the Bible was the justification for the Crusades, was the justification for the Inquisition, was the justification for a lot of persecution of a lot of people. But that doesn't diminish the greatness of the book. That doesn't diminish the love and the compassion and all of the good messages that are preached in the book. And I think if we can get past this too long didn't read generation, if we can start educating ourselves and starting to take more open perspectives and starting to understand that, what we are thinking we're reading into something could be incorrect, and it could be biased by the way we see the world. And, if we just take this more open approach, then I think it's not just going to change the way you read, it's going to change the way you deal with other people. And, what the world needs is more compassion. The world needs more forgiveness. The world needs us to see each other not as the archetype that we imagine the other person to be, not as the group they belong to or the demographic they belong to, but as the person they are. And the more we can open ourselves up to new perspectives, the more we can understand what it is that is wrong with the world, and the more we can come together as individuals. I love you guys so much. Thank you guys so much. I would say this is something that you should read after you've already read Nietzsche, because it's not going to be as interesting. I don't want you to be turned off by any of the or boring section of this book. I would say if you want to read something by Nietzsche, the first place to start would probably be The Gay Science. I think it's the most positive, it's the most poetic, it's the most interesting, and it's the most concise of his books that I've read. And you know, it's probably the only book by Nietzsche that I've read that I've been like, this is awesome, this is cool, I'm having fun reading this. Everything else is kind of depressive. Everything else is kind of not as inspiring. Even though Spoke Zarathustra has some boring parts, but The Gay Science is the end all be all when it comes to Nietzsche. But this is definitely a good addition to your library if you're a avid Nietzsche fan like me. With that said, I love you guys so much. Peace out. I will catch you in the next one.